All right. Well, let's go ahead. Well, if I start talking, maybe somebody else will come. So, and with only one of us here, we'll skip the prayer and the spiritual thought. But I uh, I did want to add just one thing. For our class, we are in week 9. We are on our third Doohickeys assignment. And a couple of things. First of all, I'm still working through week 7, and again, other grading that's behind, I apologize for that. It's a direct result of my hospital stay and trying to get back to life. I will get that caught up as soon as I can. As far as I know, everybody's doing well in the semester. We've had a couple of people that have had to change groups based on a couple of other issues, but for the most part, we're doing okay. Again, my apologies, and you guys have been very patient with my schedule, and hopefully this will be a bit of a help as we chat through both discipline and wage and hour. Both of those will be our topics for tonight. And Lori, love to hear your comments if you've got some. And Bridget, certainly as you understand the class, feel free to jump in, and we will go from there. So, and again, I want to thank everybody continuing for their thoughts and prayers in my behalf. And it's interesting how much we take for granted simple things like driving a car. I was so excited to drive today. It was thrilling. And going to work, I almost hugged my boss just to tell him how grateful I was to be at work, and it was kind of funny. So it's
awesome.
It's the simple pleasures of life that we often take for granted. So let's talk about wage and hour, and I'm going to start with that one because that one's actually pretty simple. Wage and hour is real simple. That's the group that's in charge of, are you paying people correctly, and are you not trying to take away overtime and other things that go along with that? That is a state function, and more than that, a federal function. Most of the time, if there's an issue, it will come from the federal government because that's the group that cares about that. Depends on the state you live in most of the western states, it's probably more of a federal function, and stronger perhaps in eastern states where the states may have a stronger hand in labor and the things that go along with that. So a couple things to go along with this. When it comes to an HR function, I don't know any company that has an HR function that, or any company at all that's of any merit, that is not going to pay their people for every minute worked. And if you could sum up one thing for wage and hour, it really is you pay people for what they work, period. And companies that either withhold pay or don't pay or have people work less or try to finagle hours or whatever the case may be really deserve what they get. Those of us that really believe this, not just because we have to, but because it's the right thing to do, have really little patience for people that say, well, I'll pay you next week, or I'm skipping a paycheck, or those type of things. Anybody that works for a company like that, unless it's your mother-in-law paying you for cleaning up the leaves in the yard or something, if you're having those kind of issues, it's probably a good indication that you need to change jobs or find jobs. Throughout my career, I am amazed that I still find people that say, I came to work for you because my last boss didn't pay me. And it's not unusual, and it is a huge red flag if anybody either asks you to do that, or you find yourself doing that, or you as an employee are on the receiving end of that. It's time to make some serious introspection and find out if it's your business and you can't pay people, it's probably time to fold the business. If you work for somebody that's doing that, then it's probably time to certainly find another job. And this is one of those places that I think the companies I've ever worked for have had very few wage and hour complaints. And that's one of those parts of the government that really, if that is what you are experiencing, it's probably a good thing to complain, to talk to the wage and hour, either federal or state, and say, hey, this person's not paying me, or they're not paying me correctly. So that's just a thought that goes along with that. It's pretty black and white. It's kind of one of the basic HR things that says if you've got problems here, you've got real problems. The other one I would add is some companies really have a hard time paying overtime, and they try to negotiate their way out of it. In most states that we live in, overtime is 40 hours or more, but not on an individual day. So literally you could work 24 hours and not get overtime. And there's reasons for that. It makes sense. At the same time, you should have companies that, if they are working you over 40 hours, should not be nickel and diming you and saying, well, you worked 38, not 40. Make sure you pay people, pay them for what they work, and when in doubt, always pay them on the high side. So don't do the, well, I think it's this, and I'll pay you a lower amount, again, unless you have a reason to think the person is defrauding you or whatever the case might be. Wage and hour does not mean that you have employees taking advantage of you on time cards or trying to steal from the company or cheat. That does not mean that you don't enforce those things, find out what the problem is, and make it right, including terminating people if that's the problem. But it's one of those black and white things that most good companies don't have a problem with. And if you find you're having a problem paying or other issues like that, it really is time for some serious introspection. Because what I've also found is most of the time when people have a problem with getting paid, it's not just 1 week. It continues. It can be multiple weeks. And you can end up working for somebody for basically several $1,000s before you really get to the point where you say, okay, that's enough. So, Bridget, as you've kind of looked at the class, any thoughts you want to add on that? Or any experiences that you've had that you would add thought to? Or Lori, certainly, if you're here.
I haven't had any personal experience with that, but I know that my daughter has in New York City. When she's worked for a job there, she worked for about 3 weeks and never got paid before she finally jumped ship and lost the money. Just had to walk away.
Yeah, and I understand that, and in my opinion, that's one of those things that should be, not faulting your daughter, but that's one of those, you know what, the employers are just plain old stealing. And
well, there was more to it. There was he made sexual advances toward her at the same time, and so she just wanted out of there. She didn't want to report him. She just wanted to get away and never see him again. So she just left.
And that's understandable, and that's certainly not. I'm not being critical, but
I know.
That's these are one of those basic human. I'll call them a human rights issue. People should be at least paid a minimum wage. I think they should be more, and they should be fair, and all that. We'll get to that in a bit. But they should not have to force to collect from an employer. It's that simple.
Right.
And anyone that employs anyone, whether it's somebody that's doing yard work for you or whether it's a full-time job, if there's a problem with you getting paid, it's time to seriously look about doing something else. And that's 3 weeks of your daughter's life she gave, and it was probably a learning experience. But there's, my heartburn with that is someone stole from your daughter several $100s and maybe even more, depending on what she was doing and how long, what that was. So.
Well, and the sad thing was because she didn't want to have to go through the emotional roller coaster of filing charges. She just walked away.
And a lot of people count on that. It's not worth the trouble or whatever. But again, just keeping in mind from our perspective as a class, it's a very basic HR commodity that everybody ought to be paid for what they do. So just a thought on that one. That one's pretty black and white. And Bridget, I appreciate your comments, and hopefully those of you that are in the class and watching this can give your own thought to that and what that really means. Let's talk about discipline for a little while. I want to do a couple of things with discipline, and one of those is to talk about the fact that almost everyone fires themselves. Most employers are not looking to discipline someone unless there's a problem. And I'm going to start with a story. This has happened multiple times in my career. And the story is almost always someone is terminated. Something like this comes out. I can't believe you terminated me because I was late and had a flat tire today. I can't believe you terminated me for this minor thing. Or I can't believe you terminated me because of what somebody said or what I did do or didn't do. Typically, the last straw with most employers is a small thing. Most people don't do... Lori looks like she's back. At least that's what my screen says. Most employers don't necessarily, and Lori, if you are, jump in. We've been looking at your smiling face. I look forward to any comments you've got. Most employers are not anxious to fire people. And when you look at this, an employer that has that discussion that says, okay, why are you firing me because I was late today or I had a flat tire? That's ridiculous. And the thing that goes along with this is that almost always that is never the reason that they were terminated. If I use this kind of as a backstop, it's the I was late this day, I had a write-up this day, I insulted a customer, or there was a problem this day. None of these things may have been terminable offenses in and of themselves. I was late again. I missed a day. My work was not up to standard. You can go on, and then, okay, by the way, here's the last thing. And I'm sorry, I'm terminating you for, yes, you were late today, and that's why you're being terminated. All of those offenses all along this line should have been discussed and documented and put on paper. If they were not, then that's a shame on the employer. If they are, then it's probably shame on the employee, and the documentation and the pieces that go along with that certainly fall upon the employer's responsibility. So if I take that same scenario, I have a person that's late one day, and not a big deal. Hey, Fred, come make sure you're here on time. Just a plain old discussion. You then have a missed, I don't know the chronology I had before, but missed a day, poor work. Well, that may be a first written warning that says, hey, these things, not good. And then that person goes on, and then a couple other events happen. A second written warning happens. It says, hey, look, you're on pretty thin ice because all these things are here. And then when you get to that final event, you can say, look, here's written warning number 1, here's final written warning number 2, or whatever the case may be, and here's what we're going to choose to do. Good employers don't let these small behaviors just build and build and build and build, and then out of frustration or anger, they terminate somebody. Because if the employee never had these things told to them that they were problems, then the issue is, hey, the employer didn't do a good job of coaching or disciplining or recording that. And in that sense, you do a really bad disservice to your employee, because kind of like a child, if you will, or any of us, if I have a problem and somebody talks to me and cares enough to correct me, okay, you know what, I had that happen again, I apologize, and more than likely, if they're going to, quote-unquote, fly straight or do the right thing or choose the right, whatever the case might be, they're going to do that if you spend time with them and talk to them. If you ignore the issues, and especially if they look around and see other people doing it, then the issue is, hey, everybody else is doing this, why are you picking on me? That's the norm. Well, I guess nobody cares, I'll miss a day. Nobody cares, I'll be late. Or nobody cares about my work, I'm just going to do what I can. And oh, by the way, down here at that backstop, I get fired again. So the key, I think, with employee discipline, and Lori, I don't know, again, if you're able to comment or not. We keep referencing you and your smiling face, but if you're not there, then we won't have you jump in, and I'll get your comments in a minute, Bridget, is that when you look at this, employee discipline is two things. People fire themselves because if I'm having conversations and putting written files in written comments in HR papers or HR files and teaching and warning, some employees are just going to go down that road and they're going to be fired no matter what. They fired themselves. They did this offense number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6. No matter what, if you're a company that has enough gumption to do that, and you should, sorry, you've gone too far over that line, we're going to terminate your employment. I'm sorry, it's you that's done it. But I think the key that goes along with this is so many of us as employers are either afraid or too busy or think that the problem will correct itself. And almost always that does not happen. You'll end up with, again, that group of scenarios that nobody corrected, and the employee says, well, I guess they aren't worried about it, I'm going to go on my merry way. And then you have a very angry person, and a person that may complain to the government, which would be the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and discipline that goes with that toward the company because they didn't document or terminate correctly. Bridget, I've been rambling. Any thoughts you have as you've looked at the class or in general experience?
Well, I guess, and I haven't looked at as much as the class as probably the class has, but I was just wondering, what are the federal regulations about termination? Is there a guideline that the employers have to follow?
Well, I'd say probably not. Now, there's a couple of things. Thank you for that question. There are immediately terminable offenses. Ah, I know that face. Hi, Lori. Oh,
Hi.
she's back. She's back. She's here. She's gone. You're working again tonight, aren't you?
I am.
You're a trooper. You're a trooper. We appreciate it.
I couldn't. I'd been on, but I couldn't figure out why I wasn't hearing anything, so I just kept disconnecting, and finally I can hear you.
Okay. Well, we appreciate that. Go to the part of the store where the Wi-Fi is good, right?
Yeah, I think I'm in the bad spot.
Okay. Well, Bridget asked a good question that says, are there any federal guidelines for this? And I kind of want to walk through that. There are not. All the guidelines are there is that you should give proper documentation and proper warning to people. Now, there are some offenses that go from nothing to terminated instantly. So, for example, theft, a gross safety violation where someone did something that was egregious, an accident or fighting on the job, or things that are really extreme. Companies don't need to give warning. You just basically say, this is not acceptable, you're no longer employed here, done. And that can be at a senior level, that can be at a junior level, that can be at any level of the company. There are those egregious offenses that are big enough of a deal that people are just going to get terminated right away, even in the federal government, as much as that is. You know, we read about someone that should have done something or and where something resulted in either a loss of life or a major issue where they're terminated right away, and that's pretty tough to do in a crowd like the federal government that doesn't terminate anybody for anything. So that's kind of one way to look at it. The second part in your question, Bridget, on the regulations is that the thing that needs to be seen is that they had warning, written, verbal, final written warning, whatever the case may be. Those were recorded and signed by the employee, and they had an opportunity to correct it. So, for example, if it's not the major, okay, I just caused $25,000 damage by running into somebody with my company vehicle, those things are probably right away. But if it was that smaller things that added up and no one did anything about it, and there's no paperwork, there's nothing but that final termination, then the employer's at risk, and federal law or federal issues will come up and make that difficult for the employer, and probably justifiably so. So the trick for employers is to make sure they're not afraid to document, they're not afraid to approach, and they're not afraid to let people correct their behavior. You don't want it just to be all negative, because if an employer, meaning supervisor or manager, is working with an employee and they've done some things poorly and the coaching goes through that, then that employee can turn around and feel better about what they do and end up being a model employee after time. So it's the opportunity to discuss, document, correct, and then again, in some cases, if it's grievous, to make those terminations happen right away. All of those have some general federal guidelines. The things that would be a problem is that if the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission said, you terminated this person because they were a different race or a different religion or a different nationality, you didn't like them, there was no documentation, you didn't do something to try to remedy the situation, and again, especially, there was nothing that was signed that says along with that there was a problem. Bridget, did that answer your question?
It does. So what I take away from that is documentation over and over and over if you're the employer, again, to protect.
Right, but not documentation that isn't signed. Documentation that isn't signed is useless. Matter of fact, it's counterproductive, because what that says is you made notes, but you didn't bother to talk to the employee or fix it or try to make it better.
So the employee needs to sign. The employee needs to sign the complaint. Okay.
Right.
That makes
now,
sense.
That also doesn't. Oh, go ahead, Lori.
So how is that complicated if it's if there's a union?
A union, you're basically one extra level. You're going to work with that union to say, hey, in a union, you generally have these things are things that you can file a concern to that employee about. And the union has a set over here that says, no, you're not going to complain about this. So you're going to work with that union steward or whoever that union person would be to say, hey, look, Fred Smith has been missing 5 days. That's something we can put in his file and document. And pretty much they would have an issue with that. Where they might have less concern, or more concern, I guess, if you will, is, you know, Fred's not getting along with his boss. Well, it could be the boss's concern, and the union might have more to say about that and have more pushback. And that's a general answer. Did that answer your question, Lori?
Yes, it did. And I have another one, though.
Okay, go ahead.
With all the lawsuits nowadays, do you find that people are not firing as often as maybe they should be because they're afraid of lawsuits and things like that?
I think people that don't know how to do this process fall into that, and people that have good human resource people that either coach, train, and then document appropriately aren't afraid to do this. People that are afraid of employees, that don't coach, don't train, don't manage their employees, yeah, they're more afraid and they don't do that. So a good HR function working with managers is not more afraid today than it used to be. A group that's afraid of employees or chooses not to work with an employee is absolutely more afraid. So it's really a dichotomy that happens in both ways. The trick for a good HR person is to make sure you're over here. The other thing I would add that does happen is you've got people that say a manager's not going to write something up or someone up, and then they say, I'm done with this person, I can't fix that. That's one of those that skip those steps, and those can be problems that do come back. Sometimes the HR person says, great, we can terminate them, but here's the risk. You have all these things that happen that you never discussed with them, we never put anything on paper, and we never got an employee's signature. The risk is there's about a 70 or 80% chance they're going to come back at you, and you make that call and go along that lines. The good HR people help them prepare that, get it ready, and they can make it work from there. Did I answer your question then, Lori, too?
You did. Thank you.
You can't be afraid to run your business. Fear doesn't, like we know in the gospel, fear doesn't accomplish anything. But fear because you didn't do the right thing is a problem, because that means you're probably wrong. If you talk to employees, write them up when you need to, and make sure they know where they're at, then those employment issues are much less. It just tends to work better that way. When you've got 5 documents that say, you signed this, you agreed there was a problem, and you did nothing about it, I'm on pretty safe ground. Now, some people may choose to do something about that anyway, but that's, oh well, then you did the right thing and you're protected. Again, one other thing I would add with employee discipline that's kind of written through your comments is you have to care about the people that work for you. It's not a, I'm doing this to try to fire people. It's I'm doing this to try to make my business thrive and grow. I want productive employees. I can teach them, train them, and hopefully they choose this on their own. Or it's the kind of thing where, you know, if they choose not to, I'm going to do what I need to do to make that person go out of the organization and then try to find somebody else that comes in that does a better job. Other thoughts on that, Lori? If you're still here.
I am. I know that was good. I just I think I've mentioned before that my husband is an HR director, and he's worked for 2 different companies for a long time, and he's had, in some situations, problems with the president, the CEO of the company, getting behind that. You know, it's a struggle when you're an HR person and you know what needs to happen, but they won't allow you to take the steps that you need to. That's his struggle a lot.
Mm-hmm. And I think the issue with that is open communication with that president that says, you know, that's okay, but here's the consequences. You have lower performance, you have lower morale. There's a cost to doing something, and there's a cost to doing nothing. And that's the thing I love about this function is if he has an open discussion with his president, that's okay. If the president's gun shy, that's okay. No skin off my nose, but here's what's going to happen if you don't do that. And it also helps him to educate the president that says, if you do the right things, here's what we can do. You don't want to have a culture of firing people. That's just not a good thing. But the other thing that I think that's the biggest deal is when other people that are good, productive workers see you not taking care of a person that shouldn't be there, they just get demotivated and they say, well, I'm not going to bother. Why should I care? Fred's over there taking 4 breaks an hour and not working hard, and what's the difference? Why should I bother? So the ripple effect of this, like a pebble in a pond, is a huge thing if you are too gun shy. So the trick is to be somewhere smart, prepared, and not, let's go terminate the world, but at the same time, don't be afraid. You have to do what you have to do to keep things going. So that's my opinion as an old HR dog, if you will. And those things that you're talking about, Lori, are very real because many presidents don't want to do that. Any thoughts on that?
No, I think that's good advice, and I'm pretty sure that's what my husband does. It's just, it's frustrating sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So he works in a plant that they have a lot of plants. The majority of the plants are union plants.
Mm-hmm.
His plant isn't, but they might as well be because he
Right.
has to follow those same guidelines, even though they're not union. But
Well,
the
and
company,
again, go ahead.
the majority of the company they are union plants.
And even in a union plant, you can fire people. It just takes longer, And if you're not assertive, and I'm not pointing this at your husband. Please don't take it that way. If you're not assertive and don't look at those issues, they can be real and they end up being problems. But if you say, hey, look, this is a problem. You can't just ignore this. This guy just committed the safety violation and needs to be written up. He just endangered himself or others. You may have to do a little more battle to get it, and it's a little tougher fight, but you still have a responsibility to do that. Unless the whole place is just given up. And it doesn't, most companies don't get to that point. So those are good thoughts, Lori. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you. I think your comments were all really good.
And I don't
I'll pass
envy
them
that,
on.
Okay, I don't envy that position because it's a hard thing. And what state do you guys live in?
Michigan.
Okay, yeah. Now that even makes it more exciting. Is he in an auto plant?
No, he's in. They do cans. They actually do tops and bottoms for cans. It's a big company, like 139 plants in the U.S.
Okay. And then the other thing I would add is there's probably an HR hierarchy that gives him guidelines on how he can do those things that he may have to follow as well. So it's a complicated thing, and it's not as simple as we'd like it to be. We've had case studies and other things that show people that have even violated drug offense policies that say, well, we'll give them one more chance, and they end up hurting somebody and other things like that. It's like, why didn't we fire them? Well, because we didn't want to, and the union said we couldn't. So, there's tough questions and answers that go along with that. So good thoughts. And every time I look at a can, I'll think of your husband. How's that?
Okay, sounds good. Before that, he worked for the company that invented the hang tab, those little plastic things that hang everything up in the store.
Okay.
So, yeah, that was another interesting.
There you go. So the discipline thought process is interesting. It's a challenge. It is not insurmountable. You have to do it by company. You have to do it by leadership. You have to do it consistently, and you can't just let it go and then expect to fix it all at one time. It just doesn't work that way. So it has to be consistent is probably the thing I would be most focused on for everybody in the class, is that you just have to know what to do. And by the way, discipline even includes things like, if you're a small family company, how do you fire your brother-in-law? How do you fire your mom? There's all kinds of things that make this very interesting and very complicated. And lots of companies have family relationships, even if it's not a family company. Like, for example, we've got about 200 folks in where I'm at. I would say probably 15 to 18 people are related. Husband, wife, mom, dad, sons, daughters, by the way, including the owner. Now, so, it makes it interesting and complicated, but it doesn't mean you can't do that and make that work. Go ahead, Lori.
I was just going to say, I guess one of the views that I have of discipline is it kind of is part of training. I mean, you can see it as a negative thing or you can see it as a positive thing. And like you said, if you can, redirect someone the right way, they might turn into a really good employee.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of see discipline more as being a positive thing. It might get to where it's negative, but it can be a positive thing too.
Absolutely, and if the employee chooses to have it be negative, that you're not going to choose that. You're not going to fix that. We have had terminations recently where people just don't show up. If they don't show up, they can't come to work for us. It's that simple. You have to be here. That's half of your success, is just showing up and showing up on time. If you choose not to do that, you can't work here. It's that simple. So it's all those details as well. So thank you for Bridget. Any other thoughts here as we kind of ramp up our discussion on discipline?
No, I'm just enjoying learning what I've learned. It's been great.
Okay. Now, for those of you that are watching this on our community, our Google community, a couple of things I would have you look at. How do the comments that I had compare with the readings? Some of them are going to agree, some of them may be different, some of them may be challenged by what the reading says. How do those apply in your company? And the third thing I would ask is, what would you do if you were the HR person in charge of this discipline? Lots of you are going to be involved in this in your working career, and it's not just the HR people. It's anybody, Lori, echo this if this is correct, it's anybody that's in a supervision role, a leadership role, or even just an employee. Discipline, just like in a family, if a family is well disciplined and they try to communicate and take care of things, is it typically a better functioning family. It doesn't mean some of the kids don't kind of come off the rails and go their own way. Employees can do the same thing. People are not governed by anything but agency, and that includes the workplace. Heavenly Father created agency for us to be able to make choices, and if I choose not to go to work today, there's a consequence to go along with that. Or if I choose to berate a customer, or if I choose to punch somebody, or if I choose to steal, or if I choose just to be a lousy person, you know what? There's a consequence, and those things are typically what HR people need to and should deal with. And as Lori pointed out, sometimes that's easy, sometimes that's hard, and it's always challenging. The last thing I want to look at is taking a brief look at terminations. And the thing I would add, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in future weeks, is that terminations have to be decided before the event. I can think of probably 2 or 3 terminations in my entire career where someone changed my mind. The termination has to be researched, batted back and forth, make sure it's ready, make sure it's tested, make sure tough questions are asked. And so it's not, you get in there and the employee says, well, what about this? How do you not count for that? And you have already kind of thought through all of that. So termination should be a very short discussion. The disciplines discussions and the write-ups and the coaching and the positive should be very large discussions. So more time here and more time and probably less time as you get down to the end, and the termination itself ought to be things that are pretty simple, to the point, I'm sorry, you chose not to ignore, or you chose to ignore these things we've been trying to talk to you about, so we're going to choose to end your employment. So those are things that are important to remember when it comes to discipline as well. All right, well, I thank everybody again. I appreciate your patience with grading, and we'll hopefully everybody is going well and the groups are going well. We'll be caught up, hopefully, well, certainly as the weeks go on, we'll try to get more caught up, and I'll try to make sure we've got week 7's papers done. Again, my apologies. This is not my normal way of teaching, but with illness and hospitalization as recent as less than a week ago, I'm doing my best to try to make sure we're good there. That probably sounds like whining, and if it does, you can discipline me by sending me an email and say, Brother Bonnie, lousy excuse, get back to work, and we'll take that accordingly. So thank you all. Lori, thank you for joining us. Bridget, thank you for joining us, and we will go from there. I'm going to stop the broadcast. Bridget, you want to stick around for just a minute, and I want to ask you a question. Lori, thanks again.
Yep, have a good night.
All right, you too.
Bye.